Midnight on the frontier was not merely a time on the clock. It was a living thing, heavy and watchful, pressing down on the land like a held breath. The wind hissed through the pine trees surrounding Eli Grayson's ranch, carrying with it the sharp sting of snow and the lonely cry of something, hunting or being hunted in the dark. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its last embers glowing faintly against the stone hearth, painting the walls in dull orange shadows. Eli sat alone at the small wooden table, his broad shoulders hunched, hands wrapped around a tin cup long since gone cold. He had stopped noticing the cold years ago. It crept into his bones the same way silence had crept into his life, slowly, relentlessly, until it became part of him. His wife had been gone 3 winters now, taken by fever in this very cabin, and since then the nights had stretched endlessly, each one as empty as the last. He lived because chores demanded it, because animals needed feeding, because the land did not care whether a man's heart was broken or not. But hope had died quietly and without ceremony. That was why the knock startled him so badly. It was faint at first, almost swallowed by the storm, a timid sound that seemed more imagined than real. Eli froze, every muscle tightening, his instincts sharpening the way they always did when something was wrong. No one came to a ranch at this hour in winter. No one sane, at least. He listened again, the wind roaring in his ears. And just as he began to convince himself it was nothing, the knock came again, soft, uneven, desperate. Eli pushed back his chair and stood, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He reached for the lantern hanging by the door, fingers trembling slightly as he lit it. The warm glow felt foreign, like an old friend he no longer trusted. Rifle in hand, he unlatched the door and pulled it open. The cold slammed into him immediately, biting and fierce, snow swirling in thick white sheets. And there, standing on his threshold like a ghost torn from a nightmare, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her hair, pale and tangled, was braided clumsily down either side of her small face, already stiffening with frost. Her dress was thin, clearly not meant for weather like this, and her shoes were soaked through, leaving dark patches on the snow-covered boards of the porch. One tiny hand clutched the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her cheeks were red raw from the cold, lips trembling, eyes impossibly wide and shining with fear. She looked up at Eli, and in a voice so small it nearly broke him in two, she whispered, "Mister, Mama needs help." The rifle slipped from Eli's grasp and clattered to the floor, forgotten. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his mind refusing to catch up with reality. The last time a child had looked at him like that, trusting and afraid all at once. His wife had still been alive, still dreaming of a family they never had. The memory struck him like a physical blow. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself level with the girl, the lantern's light flickering across her face. Up close, he could see how badly she was shaking, how blue her lips were. She was freezing. She should have been dead out there. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough, unused to gentleness. "Clara," she whispered. "Mama's sick." The light went out. "She won't wake up." That was all it took. Eli swept her up into his arms, feeling how terrifyingly light she was, all bones and fear, and carried her inside. He kicked the door shut with his heel and set her down by the fire, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. He stoked the flames until the cabin glowed with warmth, then lit every lantern hanging from the beams, lining them across the table. The shelves, the windows, the light chased the shadows from the corners, filling the cabin until it felt alive again, like it had once been when laughter still lived there. Clara watched him with wide eyes, as if afraid the light might disappear if she blinked. He handed her a cup of warm milk, urging her to drink, and only then did her shivering begin to slow. Between sips, she told him what little she could. Her mama's name was Margaret. They lived in a small cabin beyond the eastern ridge, closer to the old creek. Her mama had been coughing for days, growing weaker, until tonight she couldn't even sit up anymore. The lantern oil had run out, and the darkness had scared Clara more than the storm. So she'd done the only thing she could, walked through the snow to find help. Eli listened in silence, his jaw clenched, guilt already gnawing at him. He knew that cabin. He'd passed it dozens of times over the years and never once stopped, too wrapped up in his own loneliness to notice someone else's. When Clara finished, her eyelids drooped, exhaustion finally winning. Eli gently took the cup from her hands and wrapped her tighter in the blankets. He didn't let her sleep long. Time mattered. Lives mattered. He pulled on his coat, slung the lantern strap over his shoulder, and lifted Clara again. She buried her face against his chest, trusting him completely, and the weight of that trust settled deep in his soul. Outside, the storm raged on, merciless and howling. Eli saddled his horse with hands that moved automatically, years of habit guiding him, then mounted, holding Clara close beneath his coat. The lantern swung from the saddle, casting a trembling pool of light on the narrow trail ahead. Snow stung his face. The wind fought him at every step, but he pressed on, following Clara's small directions through the darkness. Each moment felt stretched thin, every breath a prayer he hadn't prayed in years. As the faint outline of another cabin emerged from the storm, Eli felt something stir inside him, something dangerous and fragile all at eye. Once, hope, and with it came fear, because he knew too well how easily hope could be crushed. But as long as that lantern burned, as long as that child clung to him, he would not let the darkness win. The wind seemed to grow angrier as Eli rode closer to the cabin, as if the night itself were trying to stop him, clawing at his coat, screaming through the trees, hurling snow into his eyes until the world narrowed to little more than the faint, golden circle of lantern light, swinging before him. Clara clung to him, her small body trembling not just from cold now, but from fear of what they might find. Eli felt her grip tighten when the outline of the cabin finally emerged, half buried in snow, its roof sagging under winter's weight, its windows dark and lifeless. No smoke rose from the chimney. No light flickered inside. The sight made his stomach drop. He slid from the saddle, boots crunching heavily in the snow, and carried Clara the rest of the way, each step slower than the last, dread pressing harder with every breath. Inside, the cabin was colder than death itself. The air smelled stale and sharp, heavy with sickness and neglect. Eli set Clara gently on a chair near the hearth and immediately went to work, striking a flame, coaxing life from cold ashes until the fire caught and crackled weakly, then stronger. He lit the lantern and moved toward the narrow bed against the far wall. Margaret lay there, barely moving, her skin pale as candle wax, lips cracked, breath shallow and uneven, each rise of her chest a question mark rather than a promise. Eli knelt beside her, setting the lantern close, studying her face the way he once studied his wife's in those final days, searching for signs, for hope, for anything that told him he wasn't already too late. He spoke to her softly, though he didn't know why. Maybe he was speaking to himself, to the ghosts that haunted him, to the memory of the woman he had loved and lost. He warmed water, dampened cloths, pressed them to Margaret's forehead. He coaxed a few drops of broth between her lips. He worked with the careful, stubborn patience of a man who refused to surrender again. Clara watched silently, eyes never leaving her mother, small hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles turned white. When Margaret finally stirred, just barely, a faint sigh escaping her chest, Clara let out a sound halfway between a sob and a prayer. The hours crept by, slow and merciless. Outside, the storm howled on. But inside the cabin, warmth slowly returned, pushed back by fire and light and sheer will. Eli never left Margaret's side. He remembered everything he had learned 2 late years ago, every mistake he had sworn he would never repeat if given another chance. And somehow, as dawn's first gray light crept through the frost-covered window, Margaret's breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then settling on Eli's face with confusion and fear. He told her gently who he was, that her daughter was safe, that she was going to live. When Clara rushed forward and took her mother's hand, the sound Margaret made then broke something open inside Eli that had been sealed shut for years. He stayed long after the danger passed. He fixed the door, sealed the cracks, chopped wood until his arms ached and sweat froze on his skin. When he finally left, it was only because Margaret insisted. Her voice still weak, but her eyes clearer now. He promised he would return the next day. And the next. And as he rode back to his ranch, the lantern swinging beside him, he realized something had changed. The night felt less empty, the silence less cruel. Over the following weeks, Eli kept that promise. He brought food, medicine from town, oil for the lanterns. He taught Clara how to stack wood properly, how to tell which clouds meant snow and which meant rain. Her laughter followed him through the cabin, chasing away the echoes of grief that had lived there too long. Margaret grew stronger, her gratitude deep and quiet, her strength unmistakable. They spoke in the evenings by lantern light, sharing stories of loss, of survival, of dreams buried but not dead. Eli found himself staying later each night, reluctant to return to the empty ranch, reluctant to step back into a life that no longer fit him. One evening, as snow drifted gently instead of violently, Clara fell asleep between them, her small head resting against Eli's arm. Margaret looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw something there that mirrored what he felt: fear, hope, and the fragile beginning of trust. No words were spoken, but none were needed. Eli knew in that quiet moment that the knock at midnight had not just saved a life. It had given him his own back. And if this story has touched your heart so far, subscribe to the channel now. These are the stories we tell here. Stories of darkness broken by light, of second chances found when hope seems lost. More unforgettable frontier tales are coming, and you won't want to miss them.